My name is Mary Hall-Rayford, and in recognition of Women's History Month, I decided to read an excerpt from Chapter 2 of this book called Lifting as We Climb: Black Women's Battle for the Ballot Box by Evette Dionne. I'm going to start right after Seneca Falls Convention and after Frederick Douglass had something to say. What did those declarations mean for Black women, many of whom were still enslaved? Douglass couldn't give voice to their specific or unique needs, though he wrote in an issue of the North Star published shortly after the convention. In respect to political rights, we hold a woman to be justly entitled to all we claim for man. We go farther and express our convictions that all political rights which it is expedient for man to exercise, it is equally so for women. All that distinguishes a man as an intelligent and accountable being is equally true of woman. And if that government is only just which governs by the free consent of the governed, there can be no reason in the world for denying to woman the exercise of the elective franchise, or a hand in making and administering the laws of the land. Our doctrine is that right is of no sex. Mary Ann Shadd Carey, a 25-year-old Black teacher living in Pennsylvania, felt shorted by the Seneca Falls Convention. How could a convention for women not include Black women? In 1848, she wrote a long letter to the North Star about the abolition movement's failure to include the voices of Black women. We should do more and talk less, she wrote in her lengthy letter, which Douglass published. And in its entirety, we have been holding conventions for years. We have been assembling together and whining over our difficulties and afflictions, passing resolutions on resolutions to any extent. But it does not really seem that we have made but little progress considering our resolve. Carey's letter echoed the sentiments of other Black women abolitionists who were asking one simple question: where were Black women's needs positioned within the Declaration of Sentiments? This question was at the forefront of SoJourner Truth's mind, when 2 years after the Seneca Falls Convention, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott approached William Floyd Garrison to ask him about truth, both attending and speaking at the National Women's Rights Convention at that. Stanton, Mott, and abolitionist Lucy Stone were organizing in Worcester, Massachusetts. Plans for this women's convention had been decided in May 1850 at a special meeting convened during the annual New England Anti-Slavery Society, NEASS, convention held in Boston, Massachusetts, Melodeon Hall. Garrison, who fought tooth and nail to include women in the American Anti-Slavery Society, supported the creation of a women's rights convention. I conceive that the first thing to be done by the women of this country is to demand the political enfranchisement. Among the self-evident truths announced in the Declaration of Independence is this: all government derives its just power from the consent of the governed. When the AASS voted overwhelmingly to approve the National Women's Rights Convention and allow it to take place in October 1850, organizers were overjoyed. The convention was an opportunity to garner more support and to secure for women political, legal, and social equality with man. Until her proper sphere is determined by what alone should determine it, her powers and capacities strengthened and refined by an education in accordance with her nature. SoJourner Truth was an important part of this mission for the convention's organizers. More than 1,000 delegates from 11 states crowded Worcester's Brinkley Hall to hear from a number of different speakers, including Truth, who spoke on both days of the convention about the trampled women of the plantation. Truth's speech captivated listeners. thanks mostly to her rare gift of being able to bear down a whole audience with a few simple words. The Worcester Convention reached a large number of people, both the men and women who attended, and those who learned about it secondhand through newspapers. Coverage was not always favorable. There was also a lot of scorn directed toward these women who dared to suggest that a woman was just as well qualified to be president as a man. Newspapers mocked the convention, making it seem as if these women's demands were unreasonable. The New York Herald even published a satirical article claiming that the organizers wanted to abolish the Bible, abolish the Constitution and the laws of the land, and reorganize society upon a social platform of perfect equality in all things of sexes and colors. None of these stopped women organizers. Every year from 1850 to 1860, a National Women's Rights Convention was held in a different city, including Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Syracuse, New York, Cleveland, Ohio, and Cincinnati, Ohio. But as each year passed, fewer and fewer Black women attended. Abolition had become their priority. The passage of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 had sent many Black abolitionists into a tailspin, knowing that the federal government could swoop in at any time and return free Black people to the plantations from which they had escaped, and sometimes sweep up those born free as well, moved many Black people from the sidelines to the center of the anti-slavery fight. Once again, abolition was an abstract concept. It could dictate the outcome of their lives. So, as SoJourner Truth prepared to deliver a speech at the 1851 National Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio, all these thoughts about the Fugitive Slave Acts, the sidelining of Black women in the abolition and suffrage movements, and her own history were swirling in her mind. When she arrived, Truth faced a hesitant crowd that was questioning if women's suffrage was worth supporting. Truth's powerful speech, Ain't I a Woman, gave them something to think about. Truth's now legendary lecture showed the unique position that Black women were in as it related to abolitionists and suffrage movements. She first called out white men and white women who didn't even perceive her as a woman, given their narrow understandings of a female as someone in need of aid. That man over there says women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best places everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered onto barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen most all sold off to slavery. And when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? Truth also spoke about how men discriminated against women simply because they perceived women as inferior based on their religious beliefs. Then that little man in black there, he says women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with him. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now they're asking to do it. The men better let them. It was a fiery speech that resounded through abolition circles, especially among fellow Black women. They were building a baseline for support for abolition and suffrage because they were doubly impacted by lack of freedom. Still, in doing so, in lobbying for their rights, Black abolitionist suffragists faced a high level of discrimination, right down to questioning their very identity. Despite her speech and her commitment to womanhood, some men wondered if the strong, more than 6 foot tall Sojourner Truth even really was a woman. In 1858, during a meeting in Silver Lake, Indiana, someone accused her of being a man. Sojourner Truth opened her blouse and flashed her breasts. Truth's work brought her into the company of white abolitionists, including Mott and Stanton, who considered her an equal and themselves an ally to Truth's cause. That level of solidarity didn't last. I hope you enjoyed that. I also hope you'll be inspired to read the book for yourself and read the entire second chapter, which starts out as Ain't I a Woman? A Culture of Womanhood. Again, my name is Mary Hall-Rayford. I live in East Point, Michigan, and I certainly hope that everyone will take advantage of this opportunity to celebrate women's history and all that we have done in order to get where we are, where we now have a woman as vice president. And there's more to come, I'm sure of it.